Today is February the 19th. Today, Jesus fulfills the law and the prophets. So today, working through the Sermon on the Mount, let's read Matthew 5:17 to 20. Don't think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus here refers to the law and the prophets. This sounds a little bit strange to us, but it's a reference to all of the Old Testament. The Hebrew Bible consisted of Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Torah, the law. Nevi'im, the prophets. Law and the prophets, that's the whole Bible. Ketuvim are the other writings, things like Psalms, Proverbs. They're thrown in there at the last. Jesus says, I didn't come to do away with the Old Testament. I came to actually bring greater meaning to the Old Testament. Now, already, Jesus has apparently been accused of breaking the Old Testament. He says, oh, no, I am truly obeying it. Let's read the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 11. Stick around afterward. We'll have a few more comments.
Deuteronomy 11, 1 through 25, New Revised Standard Version. You shall love the Lord your God. Therefore, keep his charge, his decrees, his ordinances, and his commandments always. Remember today that it was not your children who have not known or seen the discipline of the Lord your God, but it is you who must acknowledge his greatness, his mighty hand, his outstretched arm, his signs, and his deeds that he did in Egypt to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and to all his land, what he did to the Egyptian army, to their horses and chariots, how he made the water of the Red Sea flow over them as they pursued you, so that the Lord has destroyed them to this day, what he did to you in the wilderness until you came to this place, and what he did to Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, son of Reuben, how in the midst of all Israel the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, along with their households, their tents, and every living being in their company. For it is your own eyes that have seen every great deed that the Lord did. Keep, then, the entire commandment that I am commanding you today, so that you may have strength to go in and occupy the land that you are crossing over to occupy, and so that you may live long in the land that the Lord swore to your ancestors to give them and to their descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. For the land that you are about to enter to occupy is not like the land of Egypt, from which you have come, where you sow your seed and irrigate by foot like a vegetable garden. But the land that you are crossing over to occupy is a land of hills and valleys, watered by rain from the sky, and the land that the Lord your God looks after. The eyes of the Lord your God are always on it, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, if you will only heed his every command that I am commanding you today, loving the Lord your God, and serving him with all your heart and with all your soul. Then he will give the rain and your land in its season, the early rain and the later rain, and you will gather in your grain, your wine, and your oil. And he will give grass in your field for your livestock, and you will eat your fill. Take care, or you will be seduced into turning away, serving other gods and worshipping them. For the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens, so that there will be no rain, and the land will not yield its produce. Then you will perish quickly off the good land that the Lord is giving you. You shall put these words of mine in your heart and soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand and fix them as an emblem on your forehead. Teach them to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, and when you lie down and when you rise up. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land that the Lord swore to your ancestors to give them, as long as the heavens are above the earth. If you will diligently observe this entire commandment that I am commanding you, loving the Lord your God, walking in all his ways and holding fast to him, then the Lord will drive out all these nations before you, and you will dispossess nations larger and mightier than you. Every place on which you set foot shall be yours. Your territory shall be extended from the wilderness to the Lebanon, and from the river to the river Euphrates, to the western sea. No one will be able to stand against you. The Lord your God will put fear and dread of you in all the land on which you set foot, as he promised you.
So there in Deuteronomy 11, Moses says, just obey, be sure that you obey. Now, Jesus is all about obeying the Old Testament as well. How does he do that? Well, following this paragraph, he gives us 6 examples. Each example follows a particular pattern. First of all, he says, you have heard that it was said. Now, the interesting thing is that in the New Testament, when the Old Testament is quoted, they say, you have heard that it was written. But here, Jesus says, you've heard that it was said. He's not talking so much about the Old Testament as he's talking about what the Pharisees and the scribes say about the Old Testament. Then he quotes an Old Testament passage. Then he says, but I say. And then he refers to a different part of the Old Testament. Now, consistently, in all 6 of these examples that he gives, he's saying that it is not the words, it's the idea behind the words. Jesus is kind of referring back to what we've already looked at, where Ezekiel, Jeremiah promise that God will put in us a heart of flesh and write his law internally on our hearts. Jesus says sin begins internally as well. We'll start working through those 6 examples. What else should we do today? Well, I just have a question for you. How well do you really know the Old Testament? Part of what we're trying to do here is show how crucial a good understanding of the Old Testament is to be able to understand Jesus' words. Listen, learn the Old Testament. Scripture reading from the New Revised Standard Version by Emily Herrera. Do you like what you heard? Follow